Hey, party people, it's Jaime. Producing our podcast, Confessions of a Creative Director, is one of the most rewarding and fulfilling projects of my life. I can't believe I get to meet and talk to some of the most successful and influential creative directors from around the world. I'm thrilled by all the support and encouragement I receive from listeners everywhere. Now, as a fan of the show, I invite you to join my Patreon and become a supporter of the show. You'll help me cover the editing, hosting services, and maybe the occasional tequila soda for yours truly. If you've derived real-world value from my conversations with the world's best creatives, this is your way to help keep it going. Visit my Patreon and sign up to become a supporter today. You'll get access to additional content from the show and maybe even a few surprises. I'm looking forward to many more episodes, and I hope you'll come along for the ride with me. Visit patreon.com/confessions of a creative director to become a supporter today. That's patreon.com/confessions of a creative director. Thanks. This episode is brought to you by What's the Big Idea? An indispensable guide to becoming a kick-ass creative director by yours truly, Jaime Cabrera. Pick it up on Amazon and now available on Audible. Hey, party people, welcome back to the podcast, Confessions of a Creative Director, the original podcast made by a creative director for creative directors, for aspiring creative directors, for creatives of all types looking to up their game by learning from the world's best. This is your podcast, and I am your host, Jaime Cabrera. On today's podcast, we have the kind, generous, and supremely creative Shlomo Genchin. You probably know him from his super popular newsletter and website, thecreativemarketer.net, where he shares recipes, tools, and techniques for writing creative copy, content, and ads that help creatives achieve better work more consistently and efficiently. But he also has a day job as creative director at Ground Up VC, where he helps 45 startups with all their creative and marketing needs. And he believes this sector is the Wild West for bold, creative cowgirls and cowboys looking to disrupt and make a career-defining work. And he's here to tell us all about it. So saddle up and let's get into it with Shlomo Genchin. How are you, buddy? Nice to see you.
Hello, I'm doing great. Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, of course. For the audience listening at home, I've been trying to get Shlomo on for a long time. A lot of it was my fault, just kind of like so many things going on. But I just knew that I wanted to have you on and to first of all say thank you for all the amazing content that you put out into the world to help our fellow creatives be as successful as possible. So I know I often am saving all of your tips and tricks and techniques. So thank you for everything that you're doing to bring up the next generation of creatives.
Yeah, of course. Thanks for reading my stuff. And like it's crazy, like sometimes I don't even know who's reading that and who's not, and then like hearing that from you is pretty amazing. So thanks.
Yeah. Well, you have 35,000 followers and tons of people that follow your newsletter. So you're definitely, I think, making a big impact and a big difference. So I believe that's got to feel pretty good. And that's not even your day job, right? You have kind of a day job as head of creative for Ground Up Ventures, which we're going to kind of talk about your POV on that and kind of the future of where all the great creative jobs are heading. So that's your day job, but in your spare time, you have founded the Creative Marketer, which you describe as building the world's largest collection of techniques and tools for copywriters, marketers, and other creative creatures. Tell me about how you got started with that. Why did you want to do that? I mean, I know I had my reasons for starting the podcast and writing the book, but how did you get started? What was that story? What's that origin story?
Sure. Yeah. So I think it all started. I was kind of scrolling on LinkedIn, and and it kind of looked weird to me, just seeing all those like people from our industry just like writing like humbled and honored, and I'm so excited to share this thing, and I won these awards, and then like disappearing for a year again, and then coming back again in a year and doing the same thing all over again, just like to disappear again. And it kind of felt to me like those Instagram influencers who just like post only their most beautiful moments, where they're like, I don't know, on vacation or whatever, and then that's it, and you don't see like the struggle and all the like shitty parts and sleepless nights and all of that. And I thought like, wow, like that's a shame, like I would love to see, I know, like the process behind like those people's work and what they're doing and all of that. And that's how and that's how I started posting my stuff. And like, of course, like I didn't have the experience or the knowledge of like all those like, crazy creative directors I looked up to. But like still I decided, I'm going to go for it and just share like, I started with just sharing my work, stuff I did for Burger King and a few other things that have won awards. And then later I even started just sharing work that, that I didn't even produce ever, just like techniques, just like kind of showing recipes and step by step guides of stuff that I did. And I remember that one of the first ones that, like really like showed me that that thing is working, like people care, was a Tinder post that I did. It was like how to write a tagline for Tinder. And I shared that technique that I call like elaborate, eliminate, and play. So I show like how you can write like this little manifesto, just to like write everything you know about the product. Then you eliminate, like you just like scratch out all the words that don't matter, everything that's not interesting, and only keep the cool ones, like the, I don't know, people, and swipe and simple, and like kind of all the interesting stuff that you have there. And then you just put those in like a big word bank kind of, and then you play with those until you get something interesting, like an interesting tagline. And the tagline I got back then was for every single person, which like a month later, OkCupid came out with a campaign, and that was their tagline. But it was like a complete coincidence. It was crazy.
Really?
Yeah, but that post got viral. Like, I mean, it got like 1,000 likes at the time. It was crazy for me because I had like 500 connections, or I don't know. And I saw like, all right, like people actually care about that stuff.
Yeah, that's great. So that's the moment when you realized, okay, there's something here, and people are hungry for this. I love this idea about how certain creatives are like Instagram influencers. Like you said, they're only posting the beautiful pictures of them on the beach, but they're not posting the struggles, the doubt, the and also, I guess you could say some of them are also not sharing the wisdom that maybe help them get to where they are, right? They're kind of keeping that for themselves in a way, assuming that they actually did the work and not just put their name on the award entry. But
Yeah.
that is interesting that they just kind of, they're not sharing all the struggling part or all the nuts and bolts of how they got there or how they did it, right? It's just, thank you so much, like you said, I'm so humbled and honored, and that's funny. I love that. I love that.
Yeah. And I think in a way it also connects just like this. Like I think sometimes it's not even because like they're trying to hide anything, but I think it's just like Dan Elkin says that they don't know themselves, right? Like they kind of keep it as something like magical that just happens, like those ideas just come to them, which sometimes happens, like we all know that. But
Right.
on the other hand, I mean, there's still process, like you did something, and like I think it's kind of worth just like looking back even for yourself, like just to kind of break it down and reverse engineer it and just see what actually happened there, so you could do it again next time, because otherwise like you're going to get the next brief and then you're like, well, what now?
Yeah, exactly. And I think we've talked about this before, but you're a big Dan Nelken fan as I am, right? Where
Absolutely.
the thing that always sticks out from my conversation with him was this idea of like we need to spend more time thinking about how we think, like how
Hmm.
do we get to these ideas, how breaking it down, like you said, reverse engineering and figuring out, because then the next time that you do something you'll at least have a framework. Where have you learned these things? I imagine some of them you've learned just by being in the business, some of them you've learned from Dan's book. I'm sure there are things that you've said like, oh, I like this, but I'm going to, add this to that or whatever. But how have you learned all these things? Where did you learn some of the techniques that you share with your audience?
Yeah, so I think the basics really in Miami Art School, right? I went to Miami Art School Berlin, and that's where I really learned like all the bit. Like I didn't know anything before that. Like I learned all the basics of concept and insight, and and all the stuff that's that we are basically use every day. And that was kind of the base of it. But then later, like even like I think like at some point I discovered that it's not only the things that you learn like in school or like in that course, and there are also other books. And I started kind of digging into like the stuff that I have here behind, like the advertising concept book and Howard Gossage, and later like hey we will squeeze this, and then all of the basics. And then like I became like a real kind of creativity nerd, and I started like learning Edward de Bono's work, and a lot of like other like interesting just interesting stuff that even like is kind of usually like maybe related more to comedy or to theater and stuff like that. And that kind of became also super interesting to me because I see that there are a lot of techniques in theater, for example, that could apply also like humor principles, or or the way even that you develop a character that could really apply to marketing or to advertising as well. Because like they approach character development in a much more human way, right? Like they don't really think like as much like about like income or media channels or stuff like that. Like they actually think about like who this person is surrounded by, or like who I don't know who is influencing him. Like what does he want? What is he afraid of? And what is he afraid of? And then like stuff like that. And I think that's like way more powerful than like just regular personas.
Yeah. Have you always been, because what you're describing is really a student, is becoming kind of a student of the of the craft, right? Have you always been that way? Have you always been that the kind of person that likes to break something down and really study it, or did that come from a point of getting to a point in your career where you're like, I need to better understand how to do this, or have you always had that kind of student mentality?
Yeah, I really think no, I don't think I always had that. I think it really came from desperation, because I think that when I when I was in art school, and it started there. Like I was desperate, man, because like there was like it's so much pressure. It's way harder than an agency. I'm serious. Like we had so many briefs and so many things to do. And then at some point I was like, okay, like I can't keep just doing that from scratch every time. Like I need some kind of cheat sheets or cheat codes, or I don't know, I need something. So then I started this folder, and it had like like just a bunch of printed pages that I had with different techniques that I found. So a few pages from Mario Prikin's book, with his creative techniques, and then a few like then there was one cheat sheet with like media channels. So there was like print. There was like floor stickers, bus stickers, like podcasts, like VR, anything like you could do, like just a bunch of channels, and that would help me a lot. And then like slowly this folder would get like thicker and thicker, and I would just walk around with it and like let other people use it too, like my partners usually. And yeah, and I think like that's how I became so obsessed with it, because I knew that like if I'm not gonna like find this kind of like competitive edge, or find like this one trick that other people don't know, I'm just gonna stay up all night. And that was basically my little cheat sheet. And
Yeah.
later when I started sharing my stuff, it was basically the same stuff, just like with a nicer layout and kind of written more well, but it was the same stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I have to say, all of your stuff always looks so beautiful and wonderfully laid out. But just just asking, kind of like a cynical person would do. Why would you want to share that? Like, why wouldn't you want to keep all that stuff for yourself and be, the world's, best creative writer or creative in general? Like, why would you want to share it? You know what I mean? Like, what is it about you that makes you want to share what you've learned? Because I mean, there are a lot of people that would probably, and those are probably the same people you're describing earlier that just like to pop their heads up, on LinkedIn once a year to tell everybody how humble they are to have won a can. But what is it about you that made you want to go like, hey man, I want to share this stuff?
Yeah. Yeah, well, look, I think there are two sides to it. Like the first one, I could say that I just enjoy helping people. But I guess that's like would be half a lie because if I could, like I do enjoy helping people, but if I could just like not do it, maybe it would be easier. I don't know if I would do it anyway. But I feel like it's a really good like way to market myself. Like I've been
Mm,
freelancer, like I've always been a freelancer. I never had like a real job, right? Like even when I worked for like a BDC, I've always been freelancing and I always wanted that kind of lifestyle. Like I surf and it was important to me that I could, I don't know, live in Mexico or Costa Rica or like just be somewhere and just be free. And I knew that like if I want to, go that path and I don't want to just like, go the regular kind of agency way and just climb the ladder, then I need to find some kind of way to promote myself. And
yeah.
once like the first posts were just like to kind of, I don't know, maybe impress people or something. But then I saw that, yeah, like it's working. People are liking that. And I think the coolest part about it, like the coolest part about like sharing everything I know is that eventually like, people are like, first of all, I think there are no real secrets, right? Like eventually everything would be
Right.
shared. So the question is just, are they going to hear it from me or from someone else? So I prefer them to hear that from me. And that's the first thing. And the
Right.
second is, I think that like usually when people see that, it's not like they steal all my secrets. They just hire me to do that. Like often I would share some techniques and they would be like, cool, but like I'm too busy to do that, or I want you to do that. Because there's always like this little creative gap, right? Like it's never like no matter what you
Right.
share, there's always like something missing there. Like you need that like last piece to like of that
Yeah.
person basically to do that. And that's how I've been getting all my work, and I don't know like this podcast thing and everything, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it is pretty. Let me let my dog out here because he's going nuts.
No problem.
So, in a way, you're giving potential employers a look at you at how you're going to handle a problem, right? And just seeing some of the things that you put together, of course, they would trust you, and they would, in some ways, it's proof of concept of what they're going to get, right? As opposed to somebody that's just saying like, I'm available for this,
Yeah.
hire me. You're basically showing them what you're going to do for them without actually doing it. I love this idea. So is this true? Did you actually live remotely in other places and do your work? I think you mentioned Mexico and Costa Rica. Is that really part of your process, or is that part of your dream?
No, that happened. That happened. I mean, once I did it already, then I figured that it's not as nice because like I worked at BDC at the time, so that was so like BDC Paris, and then I live in Mexico, so the time zones were different. So I had to wake up every day like at 4 a.m. So yeah,
Right.
so I mean, it was amazing to live there, but then it was also kind of difficult and lonely. And like I enjoyed the surfing, I enjoyed the vibe. It was like I did it for 4 months, I think, or five, and that's it. And then I was like, all right, I want to back home. I want to see my friends every night, and like I don't want to live that way anymore. But still, like I still
Right.
enjoy kind of working remotely. But yeah, I did that. It was cool.
That's awesome. That's awesome. So are you like a Tim Ferriss fan?
I was like, I mean, I'm still like, I don't know, I haven't heard from him for
Yeah.
a while, but yeah, but like Tim Ferriss like inspired me a lot. I read his book at the beginning, and I was like, but and I was like, yeah, that's a cool way to live. Although I read a funny tweet
Yeah.
a
I
few
wish.
days ago. Yeah,
Yeah.
like it said that everyone I know who read the 4 Hour Work Week works like 60 hours a day or something. So, and that's how it is, I think.
Yeah. No, I love Tim Ferriss, and it's definitely, a fantasy of, obviously I'm older than you, but it was always kind of like, man, I wish I could have done that. If, maybe I had kind of started a little bit earlier, I could have done that. And I love Tim Ferriss, but yeah, you have to kind of take everything with a little bit of a grain of salt, right? It's just kind
So
of
yeah.
like the aspiration, and you try to get close to that. But yeah, sometimes it's definitely a little bit much. Well, that's pretty cool. Congrats. That sounds like a pretty successful way to operate. So let's talk a little bit about how you see kind of the world of advertising and marketing a little bit differently. You're seeing an opportunity, maybe a little bit earlier than some other folks. But tell us about why you think that business to business and tech, that whole marketing landscape, is the place to be. Tell us about that. It's really interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. So like I think like, when I started, I also didn't know anything about that. But then I think that when I actually started like posting on LinkedIn and sharing my stuff, then originally I thought it would be only for agency creatives. I thought it would be like for people like me, and people are going to like it, and then it would be like kind of like, I don't know, maybe a version of like Deck of Brilliance and whatnot. But then slowly I started noticing that most of the subscribers to the newsletter and most of the people like writing me in the DMs were actually people working in tech. And I was like, that's interesting because like I didn't know these people were interested, like in advertising or creativity, especially at all. Like they were doing their performance marketing stuff, and that's boring, and that has nothing to do with us, like our cool activation and all the stuff that we're doing. But then slowly I kind of started, digging into this world. And then one day I got a phone call from David, who is now my boss, and he called me and he said like, yeah, like I have a VC, I run a VC firm, and we have like 40 to 50 portfolio companies, and come work for us and be our like, and help those companies with what they're doing, like with creativity. So of course I like pretended I knew what a VC firm was. I googled it, and then I figured out, all right, like that's pretty interesting. I'm kidding. I worked with a few startups before, but then like that was kind of my, where I started seeing what's actually happening there. And once I discovered it, and once like I got into this, I found out that it's such an interesting opportunity for creatives, and for a few reasons. Like the first part is that it's like the Wild West, really. Like it's crazy what's happening there, because like think about it, like all the big brands, like all the big consumer brands, they're already established, right? Like they already have their voices, and they have like their brand and colors, and it's all like so strict, and even like if they have a lot of budget and a lot of like agencies working for them doing creative stuff, they're still like, they have all this process in place, right? But then if you look at, like tech brands, like you have gigantic brands, so like Fortune 500 companies, they don't have anything in place. Like they don't have a voice. They have a logo and some colors for their presentations or something, but they don't have like really anything going on. So then there is so much ground to explore, right? Like, because if you think like, I don't know, if you're working on Nike or Burger King campaign, like, of course, you can always find a new angle and another thing and something relevant, or RTM. I don't know, like you would find something, of course. But then with those companies, you can just start like with a blank canvas and do some crazy stuff. Plus, like a lot of them are much more open. Like if you're thinking of startups, then these people like would do anything, to get PR and to get, like to for people to see them. And they're, they don't have like big legal departments who would say like no to all your ideas. Like they would just go with that. And that's, and that's been super fun for me, because like I'm working on their ads mostly right now. And it's, it's been incredible. Like we don't have huge budgets, of course. Like we can't produce like Super Bowl ads. Like that's something I admit, right?
Right.
But then like, for example, like my favorite thing is print ads, really. Like I've always loved print ads. And at some point I was like, yeah, you know what? Like maybe I was born too late. That's it. Like, I mean, that time is over. And now the only thing that counts is activations and PR stuff. And I'm not gonna get, like to write funny headlines or make like those ads like the ones that I admire anymore in my life. And that's it. And I should just accept that. But then I see that, in that space, all those things are actually happening. Like you can still make long copy, right? Like you can still write long copy ads, and you can still like create print ads but even if if you run them on LinkedIn or you run in some other places, but still like you're still creating those like, like kind of old school ads that are really fun to make and really interesting. And there's so much like creativity that you can explore there, and they're also cheap to produce. And yeah, and I think that's quite incredible. And I'm not the only one, because I've been like speaking with a lot of creatives, and since I started doing that, like a lot of creatives are reaching out to me from like the biggest agencies like Ogilvy and BBDO, and like a lot of creative directors writing to me and saying like, yeah, how can I do that too? I mean, I'm tired of, I'm sick of that old regular stuff, and I want to try something like that. Like I want to work with startups. I want to work closer with the founders, like without like account executives between us. And I just like want to do the real thing, just like execute work all the time rather than another round of feedback or rebrief, right?
That's pretty cool. So, specifically with Ground Up Ventures, right? I think you mentioned it's 45 early stage startups, and you're helping
Right.
them with all aspects of their brand, but also are you also helping them think creatively in other ways too, or is it strictly focused on sort of branding and positioning and advertising and marketing, or are you helping them think creatively in different ways as well?
No, it could be anything. I mean, it could be anything like from their also personal brands of the founders and the way they, tweet and write online, but also to the way their stand would look, like their stall would look in a conference. And that's something you could, make something creative out of that as well. Like basically there are no limits, right? Like they're super open and you can speak directly to the founders and execute something in 2 days. Like if you have a good idea, you can do it. So I mean, there are no limits there, and I think like that what makes it amazing. And these are the startups, but I'm even looking at the bigger brands and like the bigger companies like like Upwork, has been producing some amazing work, I think, and Fiverr and like Monday.com and like all those like there are companies that are like tech companies that are and B2B companies that are already producing some pretty cool like brand content and ads and stuff like that. And I think that's only the beginning, because like in a way we're just like at the same stage, like in that kind of landscape. We're at the same stage we were before the creative revolution. Like I think it's like the 1960s, where people thought like, okay, if we want to sell a car, sure, we should just like show the features of that car or of that watch, and that's it. And people are going to buy this because they're just going to compare it to and find the best product, right? And I feel like that's how a lot of people in tech think right now, and that's how it looks right now. But then I feel right, like now there is a change happening, and if more people like us would come into that space, like there's so many interesting things we could do, because also like their products are very unique. Like if you look at consumer products, a lot of them are pretty much the same. Like the only thing that differentiates them is the brand and like the things that are doing. But I think what's cool about startups is that the products are actually innovative, and there's actually a difference. Like you can actually promote like a specific feature like you would do with a car like 30 years ago, and I think that's like super interesting and a big opportunity.
Yeah, I love that thought that in that world that it's kind of the world of advertising in the 1960s, right? Where obviously you always think of Mad Men and that whole era, but it's interesting to think about that they're really kind of in a way at that level where, to your point earlier, it's sort of like the wild west. It's sort of open. So how do you how do you how does one how would you recommend that somebody who is interested in that, asking for a friend, how do you suggest that they even try to get into that world? What's the best way in your mind?
Yeah. I think that it's about two things. Like, first of all, I think, they're gonna want you, because I feel like, a lot of founders in the tech landscape, they're looking for stuff like that, right? Like they're looking for create like if you would say that you've worked for Nike's and for Nike and like for other brands, like like big brands and things that you've done, and most agency people do, then you're going to be pretty, like people are going to appreciate that, I think, like even more than they do in the agency world. So I think like we should know that agency people should know that their skills are appreciated outside as well. It's not just like inside of that like little fishbowl, right? And so that's the first thing. And the second, I think, is also kind of getting over that gap of that language barrier, kind of where we don't really speak that language, right? Like I feel like a lot of time creatives are just like kind of afraid of speaking about, I don't know, like metrics and performance and marketing and positioning and all that kind of stuff, which is really like just what we do. Like we actually already doing that, like all that positioning stuff. But it's but they're just kind of saying it differently. And then I think that just for that reason, like sometimes it feels like it's completely different. It's a whole different world, and there's no way we could like, bridge that gap. But then in reality, if you just go and start reading a little bit about startups and Paul Graham stuff, or read like books like The Lean Startup, and just start kind of learning about that stuff a little bit, and about product and about product marketing, which is really very similar to what we're doing at agencies anyway. Then I feel like it would be much easier to kind of get into that world, because you'll be able to speak the same language, and once you understand that. And I think that's also an amazing thing, like in the tech landscape, that people actually measure success of campaigns, right? Like fake campaigns, like they sometimes make at agencies that are only for awards. Like those things won't do. You need something that actually works. But I think that the amazing part is that creativity actually works. Like we kind of forgot that. It feels like sometimes we're just like doing those creative stuff, just to get awards, or just because it's cool or fun. But that actually works. I mean, like people actually appreciate good content or good ads. And I think that's kind of amazing to see the results behind it, even like just seeing that like click-through rate going up just because you came up with a better headline. I think that's pretty awesome.
So, I've become kind of a big fan of the agile process, right? The way that a lot of tech companies operate, right? If they're developing a new product or software, right? Which is for folks that may not be familiar, it's about delivering value more often and quicker. So basically, let's say you're tasked with some new project. You're going to ideate very quickly. You're going to come up with some kind of big ideas. Let's just say it's for a product enhancement or something. You're going to ideate very quickly and get back in front of the stakeholders within, call it 48 hours, to kind of present your findings. And then they're going to help you say, well, this feels good, this doesn't feel good, blah, blah, blah. And then you take it to the next step, right? And you're delivering these little buckets of value more often, as opposed to the way that a lot of other companies work, where you go away for 6 months or whatever, and then you come back, and then it's like, that's not what we were looking for at all. Do you find that because tech companies are already working in that world, that they're more open to that kind of process? Because a lot of companies are stuck in that old model of the agency, right? It's like, okay, agency, go away for 3 months and come back and show us what you got. And then oftentimes it's not right. Would you say that tech companies are more kind of in that agile way of thinking, even in their marketing or advertising efforts?
I think so, yeah. Like I think they're very much into testing, and that's kind of it, right? Like between everything that you do, you test it. And I think I think about it a lot, right? Because like for example, in the tech world, you have this term of like lean startup, and you make like an MVP, you make like a minimum viable like product, and like kind of a lean version of your product, where you just try it and see if it works. And I think it could work the same with ads, right? Like if you, for example, want to test an insight, then I think it's so much, it makes much more sense, like before you produce a film or anything like that, just to test that insight as a meme, for example, like just stuff like that, like just those kind of things where you first see if that's even working, because a meme is an insight, basically, eventually, right? It's the same thing. So if you can distill that and see how people react to that, then later when you produce a whole movie around it and spend so much budget, then it's probably going to work if it has worked as a meme. And because if the insight is bad, then no matter how much you're going to invest into it, it's not really going to be like a good ad. And that's something I've learned from from those startup founders, like that's they don't even wait for you to create like 3 executions of the same concept, right? Like you just test one and you see if it's working, and if it's not, that's it. Like, and I think that's amazing because it saves you a lot of time as well. Like, I think people at agencies are so overworked because also, like, they work so hard on creating things that eventually don't get used, or create like all those crazy presentations and decks. And then there it's kind of different. Like, things are much quicker. You can just present your ideas to the founder in like even your Figma board, and that's it. You just show it, you pick one, you run it, and you kind of roll on. Of course, it wouldn't work with like out of home, and sometimes you really need to invest into a campaign. I'm not saying that like,
Sure.
agencies are wrong and tech companies are right, and that's it. Like, I admire work that takes time, and I admire the craft, and I love all that stuff. But I'm just saying that, yeah, sure. Like, I think there is a lot we could also learn and kind of improve and do to move quicker.
Yeah, because we brands have to more and more, I think, and I know a lot of people think the same way. They have to move at the speed of culture, right? Because if you're something happens in culture, and if it's going to take you 8 weeks as a brand to react to it in some way, whether that's like creating an ad that feels like a meme, or I don't know, whatever it is, you will have lost the moment because culture has already moved on.
Yeah,
So I think that that part of it is not happening. I think there will always be room for the types of things that you talked about, right? The craft, the things that take a long time. I think there'll always be room for that. But I think the day to day hard stuff that's working hard for your brand has to be done quicker. Can't
yeah,
compromise too much on the quality, but it's got to be done quicker, faster. Um, you know, uh, Otherwise, you're just going to sort of get left behind, and that's the way that tech is, right? It's like tech can't wait. Tech is not waiting for. Let's Apple came out with this. All right, well let's take a year to respond to that. No, it's got to. You know what I
right.
mean? It's like tech doesn't work that way, and culture doesn't work that way anymore.
Right. Yeah. And yeah, and I think it doesn't even always mean like compromising on quality. It just means like shipping more work. Like, and that, so it means that, even like, of course, some of the work would be bad, but then sometimes, ideas that got killed in the meeting room still, or they got killed in some like feedback round, you would still run them anyway because you won't even have that feedback round. And sometimes they would flop, and sometimes they would work, but all right, like, you just kind of keep moving it, so it doesn't really matter.
The other thing that I love that you mentioned is that it sounds like if you're a creative person working with a VC like this, that you're also going to get um, a very quick understanding of whether the work worked or not, right? Like in terms of metrics, in terms of things like that, where oftentimes you may not always get that, right? You're going to know working at a VC whether you did something that moved the needle. Is that accurate?
Yeah, I think so. And I think, especially even like more than startups, I think, like, especially for big tech companies, where like, where they test every single thing. So, like, that's how they run things. Like, they always have KPI, and they always, and I think like marketing teams, consumer brands do it as well. But I feel like it's sometimes kind of get disconnected from the creatives. Like, the creatives are just working to create those ideas. They're like just idea machines, and they're just like doing that thing, and and that's it. But sometimes they don't even hear about what actually happened with that. Like, they would, if they create a case study, they would write like, yeah, 200%, I don't know, increase in brand
Right.
recognition or something like that. But then, I don't know, like, sometimes there's something exciting about just like seeing even like the specific ad, how it performed right away, and then maybe like changing it a little bit. Like, there is something cool about that, which also a lot of agencies do. But for me, it's not even like that testing part, but really just the part that you actually get to, I don't know, you actually get to create advertising and not just PR. You actually get to like work on specific features and work on specific things that I feel like in consumer brands, it's very often, it's kind of not about the product anymore, right? Like, it's about just entertaining, which is a good thing, but it's not really about like promoting something. And I feel like there is something like very interesting for ad people, and like, at least for me, that work of actually writing an ad for something, and seeing how it goes.
Yeah. As I'm thinking about, the work that you're describing, is there any um is there any downside, not downside, but obviously when you think of tech, right, you're going to think of very digital type of efforts, right? Maybe not so much like you even mentioned it out of home or print, or is there any downside to the fact that you're limited in the channels, or do you find that these startups and tech firms and VC funded companies are open to any channel of reaching an audience, whether that's like, hey, let's create a big stunt, or let's do a brand film, or do you feel like they're more kind of focused on things that they feel more comfortable, which is like some kind of digital ads or social or things like that? Are they open to sort of big ideas?
Yeah. I think when it comes to like low budget stunts, which is, in advertising we call stunts or like PR activations or stuff like that. And in tech they just call it growth hacking, which is the same thing. Like it's just creative ideas that with low budget you create a lot of impact. So absolutely, like people are very open to that. And there are a lot of cool stories like in the tech world that are, yeah, that could easily go, like become a case study, that people recognize, but it's just kind of like a separate world, and it feels like it's not the same, but it's really the same thing. So I think they're totally open about it. But of course, I mean, there are downsides. Like just the fact that you're not surrounded by other creatives, and just the fact that like creative teams are usually much smaller, and it's not like an agency where like creatives are the main actors, right? Like they're the main characters. Everything surrounds them, right? Like in a tech company, you're just like a small player, right? Like I mean, the people who code, or like the CEO, or like all those people are, like all those people are much more important than you. You're just like
Oh,
some weird guy coming up with ideas, right? So it's kind of different. Like you're not the main character anymore. And of course, like
that's
I mean,
interesting.
yeah. So that's different in a way. But I mean, like everything has a price, I guess.
That's a great, and frankly, I'm a big believer in, like I've talked about this before on the podcast and other places, right? Where I think it's weird at agencies that the creatives are placed on such a pedestal, um, because, and I'm probably shooting myself in the foot, but I just think that it's weird, right? It's like, oh, the creatives, oh, don't bother the creatives. Oh, this is a creative lunch. Don't, you can't, like that whole thing to me is weird because yes, it's a big part of what the agency is producing and selling, and that, but without other people, right? Without a strategist who led you in the right way, without a producer who helped bring your idea to life, at the end of the day, you'd be stuck with a piece of paper, right? So I've always thought that it's kind of weird, that they're placed on such a pedestal. So that wouldn't bother me necessarily. And also, I kind of like working in smaller teams. I think oftentimes when you have more people, right, you get that effect where you have so many people and nobody's doing anything because everybody's looking at the other person like, oh, that person will do that. So I kind of like that. um but do you agree that that's kind of, has that been your experience working in agencies, that sometimes, like, we're getting way too much of the spotlight when it should be a little bit more evenly distributed? I mean, don't get me wrong, I love, a little bit of that, but I just think sometimes it's a little bit too much.
Yeah, I agree. I like the spotlight too, but but yeah, but I agree. Like it often feels like the other people are just kind of disappearing in the background where their work is also so important. But I guess it also depends on the agencies. Like I feel like some agencies really like value their like everyone in a way, like even like the AT people, and I think that's awesome. But yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, that's cool. So, yeah, you talked about, we were kind of making these analogies, right, to like tech terms. Like you talked about, minimum viable, product. I think that's the MVP, right? And how that is kind of like how that translates into, something that maybe people at agencies would recognize a little bit more. Is that something that you've created, by the way? If not, maybe that could be a kind of a cool idea, right? It's like a a startup to agency translator, right? Or that could be kind of an interesting piece that you put together. I don't know if you've done that already.
No, not really, not really, because I never really explored that. Like, I don't know. I feel like I'm not advocating it too much. Like, I'm just like it's kind of something that I have and I discuss in conversations like with you. But I don't
Yeah.
like. I don't feel like I'm all in on that idea of like all creatives should move to B2B because I don't know. Like I mean, like something else, something different works for everyone. But I do try to kind of use that language and kind of and kind of try doing those things. And another thing that I do a lot is also like pitching in public, and that means that I like on LinkedIn, for example, a lot of time if I have an idea, and I feel like that's something that also I guess like not a lot of creatives do because it's not very common. Is if I have an idea and I want to see that idea happen. So then like I would not like necessarily reach out to that client or anything like that. I would sometimes just like execute a rough kind of layout or something like that, or just see how it could look, and then just post it and see and maybe tag the company and see how it goes. And sometimes like it starts really interesting conversations, sometimes with that brand or sometimes like with other people who saw it. But it's been working pretty great. I mean, I've been doing that for like 2 years already. Just like every time I have an idea for a spec ad, I would just post it and show the process behind it and all of that. And usually like it's like I feel like it's also kind of like in the tech world where you also pitch things and where you also like if you have an idea, you just try and put it out in the world to see how people react. And I think like that's also something that we're kind of missing as creatives, like this kind of building in public attitude where you just like, you have an idea, you just put it out, you see how it works. And, if it performs well, you already have the stats to show to the brand. You can already say like, all right, like this, people are liking that campaign. Let's run it.
Right. Yeah, I think we're sometimes fearful, right? It's like, oh, somebody else gonna do it, and then they're gonna get the credit for it, or something like that. And which, and that I guess can be a valid point,
Sure.
but you probably get to see more things come to life, right? If you're more open to sharing. So as we start to wrap up here, I mean, what's next for you? What are you planning on? I don't think you've written a book yet, have you? Have I missed that?
No, I have not. Not yet,
I
but
mean, you have so much great content that I'm sure that's got to be in the back of your mind, because I think that would probably be a super valuable resource for people. So pushing now, I'm guilting you. Now I'm pressuring you into writing a book. I
yeah,
mean, would
yeah,
that would that be something that you were interested in, or not necessarily right now?
well, absolutely. I mean, I don't know if like a printed book, because I think there is something like really nice about like a digital library that you can update all the time and kind of change. But yeah, but I'm thinking like I've been, and I really want to do it this year. I'm definitely going to do it. And like this kind of idea that I had, it's called like ad recipes, or like the advertising cookbook. And I'll just have like a lot of, it would be kind of like a combination of like deck of brilliance and hey Whipple's quiz this, and it would be like a huge library with like a lot of different like recipes that you could cook, right? Like it could be like an ad that would target an enemy, or then an ad that would target like I don't know that would have a visual metaphor or a visual simile, right? And a lot of different things like that. And each one of those like would have all the tools, all the ingredients that you need, like like quick step by step, and a lot of examples. And maybe later it would
That's
turn
great.
into a book. But that's what I'm going to build this year, and yeah, and I hope it's going to become like a resource for both like B2B and B2C creatives who will use it.
Yeah, that's cool. And if I may, I don't know if you experimented at all with the new GPTs that you can create on Chat GPT, which is basically your own sort of like chatbot. But how cool would it be if you could just use a prompt to ask it that? It's like, hey, I'm writing this type of ad.
Yeah,
What, how do I, what would I need or whatever, and then it would just kind of spit back. So that would be a really thing that you could create as well. That would be
I,
awesome.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, all the GPT stuff is so interesting. Like right now I'm working with a startup also like just as a like little side project where we're also like designing kind of like the way GPT writes and the tone of voice and really like all those things. And it's so interesting how much value like traditional advertising knowledge, has in those things. Because really like if you use GPT without like any good taste or without any traditional knowledge of like the techniques and the things that you really need to know like about the creative process, then you won't be able to produce anything good. And even if you would, you won't recognize that. Like you wouldn't be able to find like the good stuff in all the shitty stuff.
Right.
And I think like
That's
it's
true.
amazing to see like how relevant the knowledge that like more seasoned creatives have for that AI thing. Because like without that knowledge and without those like techniques, it would be basically useless.
Yeah, it's just like anything else, right? Like the expression goes in, garbage out. I mean, if you don't
Right.
know how to feed it properly, you're not going to get anything good coming out the back end. So yeah, that's definitely cool. So I recommend anybody who's listening to the program to sign up for your newsletter. Can you tell folks where they can find that?
Yeah, absolutely. It's on thecreativemarketer.com. Yeah, you can find it there.
Creativemarketer.com.
All my previous articles. It's all for free, and yeah, you can enjoy it.
Yeah, it's very cool. Thank you so much for making the time to be on the show. I really love this perspective, and I'm sure you're probably going to get a bunch of people asking you, how do I get in? I'm sold. But thank you for sharing that. And again, like I said at the very top of the program, and I mean this. I mean, thank you for what you're doing. I feel like there's a group of people, hopefully myself included, that are giving back to the community and helping the next generation, become better at their jobs. So again, thank you for doing what you do, and I look forward to keeping in touch, keeping our friendship and our partnership here alive. And I hope to talk to you again soon.
Yeah, of course, and likewise. I mean, I'm learning so much from you, so just keep doing what you're doing. It's incredible. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Shlomo. Okay, we'll talk soon. Okay, take
All
care.
right.
And that's going to do it for another episode of Confessions of a Creative Director. Thanks to my very special guest and new friend, Shlomo Genchin. Hey, be sure to sign up to my Patreon so you can hear Shlomo's 5 Other Things. It's a new segment that I'm launching exclusively for my Patreon guests. He's going to talk about his favorite quote, his favorite book, person or organization to follow, 5 things that you need to know to help you take your career to the heights that Shlomo has taken his. So be sure and sign up to patreon.com/confessions of a creative director. Be sure to pick up the book. Sign up for the podcast. Do what you can, people, to help me keep the podcast going. All these things help. Pick up an audiobook, tell your friends, subscribe to the podcast. Whatever you can do to support the podcast would be greatly appreciated. All right, well, that's going to do it. Until next time, peace, love, and creativity. See ya.